Okay, hello everyone. Hi to the people in the room. Hello if you are watching online, and also if you will be watching us later on YouTube. This is the last session of the Digital Classicist seminar for this summer. Hopefully we will see you again next year as well. And today we have Luca work from the University of Exeter and the National Gallery, where he is doing his collaborative doctoral work, and he's talking to us today about research-based 3D reconstructions of built heritage environments. And as always, just hello to everyone and welcome here. And if you are watching online, please remember to leave your comments on the right side of the screen, where you will see the box for comments and questions. And if you are in the room, please make sure that you raise your questions or queries at the end of the presentation. We would love to hear from you. So thank you, everyone, and welcome, Luca.
Thank you. Okay, today I will show you a bit of urban progress of my current PhD. And therefore, it can also be, the content can change over time, or it's not fully developed yet, so it's more work in progress. Like I said, I'm based in Exeter, the University of Exeter, and the National Gallery London, and I'm doing a PhD there. And we start this presentation by looking at the typical research problems we have with 3D reconstructions in the humanities. In this case, it's mainly the case study is mainly about art history, but it also applies to any other humanities or any other disciplines like archaeology or normal history or architecture. And secondly, we will have a short look at other projects, mainly the Florence 4D project, how they've dealt with those research problems. And then finally, we will look at two of my case studies on which I'm working at the moment with two other PhD students. Generally said, digital outputs in the humanities, such as 3D reconstructions, become much more common. But without transparent metadata or paradata, they have often a low acceptance in research. To give you an illustrative example, we can have a look at one of those reconstructions I worked before. And looking at this rendering, you might wonder what it shows, what aim it is. Evidently, you can recognize a church there, or the interior of a church, and the surface materials. However, just looking on this image, you don't know anything anymore. You don't know the uncertainties or the underlying decisions below of it. We can increase this or improve this by adding titles to our 3D reconstructions. So in this case, you know, it's the Santa Maria degli Innocenti, and it's one of many hypothetical reconstructions from the 15th century. By now we have an idea what it shows. We still don't know about all the argumentations and the discussions we had in our research project behind this. Why have you placed the tomb stubs exactly at this position? How have you decided that the side altars look like this? Or where do those paintings come from? You can see in some of those altars. All of those informations, they are basically hidden in the research, and they are not visible or accessible only over the rendering. In this case, it often happens that those renderings or those 3D reconstructions are getting published alongside an article or conference presentation or web form or any form of media. However, in those cases, when they are getting published there, you have some parts of the discussions, but you don't have all of it. You have, and then the other thing is, when you publish them in an article, you only have a 2D rendering, you only have an image published and not the 3D model itself, which kind of limits your possibilities. Because why should we reduce our digital 3D model into a two-dimensional image when we can access it interactively, move around it, or connect it directly with our data? And also, problems if you publish it only in articles or only in smaller things is they work well in small scale, but they work not so well in large scale. As soon as other people want to reuse your data or want to build up on the data or research you have done, it's difficult for them because they need to re-enter your data or need to reprocess it again. They can't just take the data over a database connection. They can't just take the 3D models from a repository and reuse them. By those kind of publications are still valid, but I would say it's that they are better in combination with the digital output of it, and not only the web output. And there are guidelines and best practices. You might be heard of them already, the London Charter and Principles of Seville, and they mainly describe how you can describe 3D models, or how you can describe the paradata or the metadata and how to describe the argumentation so that they become scientifically transparent. However, despite those documents, and many research projects are actually citing them, you have a lot of different implementations. You have a lot of research projects saying they go according to one of those guidelines or best practices, but still we see many different kinds of documentations. When they are documented, they don't document it in a way that is interoperable or shareable. They have recently been also, or not that recently, but a bit later have been published like something like the FAIR Principles. And they are basically an acronym for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And they are more towards, instead of the methodology, I'm more towards the data, how you have to present your data, that it's reusable and that it's interoperable between different projects. And together, the FAIR Principles, together with the two other guidelines, there might be a really powerful tool which we can use. Two more problems that we have, and that are also relevant for us, are the persistence and the complexity. With persistence, I mean, those 3D models, they develop over a long time or period of time, and so they change. Today, you might see different 3D models or 3D reconstructions of the same place than you might see next year when doing another presentation. And therefore, we somehow need to make sure that we have a persistent identifier and persistent states. So in case you want to refer to one of those variations or earlier versions of the model, you still can refer to it and don't have to worry that it has updated or that it looks completely different than it has looked 1 year before. And then the other problem in this is we have a lot of complexities. Creating those 3D models is quite difficult. And usually you want to share your task in a team. Like we usually do it, we have several art historians and one person who is doing the digital work, and then they work together. And also what we have, before the 3D modeling software, or in general, all the digital software, most of it is not aimed towards humanities or towards art history. They're not made for us. So we need to find ways how to use methods from other disciplines or other fields and how we can adapt them to our needs and how we can use them for us. And now with the research context, we will look a little bit into the Florence 4D project. It's a project for which I have worked before I started with my PhD. And this is also the reason why I'm using it here, because I am just familiar with the data and also my PhD now is based on it. And it's a recent project which uses many of the recent methodologies. Florence 4D is a digital art and architecture history project from the University of Exeter and University of Cambridge. It's led by Fabrizio Nevola and Donald Cooper. And its aim is to help to create a shift in how context-based research in art and architecture is delivered by bringing together various spatial methodologies from digital art history, especially by mapping and 3D visualization. Another important part of the project is adapting the results to make them more accessible for a wider non-specialist audience. With media like apps or films or anything that's easily accessible. In the Florence 4D project, we often describe our reconstruction workflow as a research-based reconstruction workflow. And it basically follows the steps you can see on this diagram. And one of its main aspects is it has two branches and they can inform each other. There's a reality-based and interpretation-based branch. For the reality-based reconstructions, we usually say it's a laser scan or photogrammetry or photographs. It's any 3D reconstruction that is based on real data that we can still measure and record today. While interpretation-based reconstructions, they are mainly based on data that we can get from archives or from excavation or that we get on a traditional way from art historians. However, you can also combine those two. You can take a 3D scan of a room and then enrich it with the data we can get from the archives. So there's some kind of overlap between them. And when we go through those steps at the end, it's really important to annotate or to document it, to document our decisions that we made and the discussions we had before we export it and give it out to our audience. So with the uncertainty in Florence 4D project, we tried out several approaches. And it's also one of the most discussed issues with uncertainty in 3D reconstructions. And the thing is, with uncertainty, we can have many different forms. We can be uncertain about how an object has looked like. We can be uncertain about where it was placed in this room or in this object, or we can be uncertain at which time it got introduced into the church or got removed again from this church. So there are many different aspects. You can't just say you're uncertain in general. It's usually it's a more specific task. And one of the most common used solutions for this is using visual cues. And then there's one of them I can show you here, is using transparency. And in this case, we have decided to color the altars, which are based on interpretations in transparent, to make the material transparent. But we leave the artworks, like the paintings, or up here the angels or the lunette, we leave in colors because we could do photogrammetry 3D scans. But this is quite intuitive and is understood well by most people that those parts are properly interpretation and the other parts are real. Like I said, there are different kinds of uncertainty. Although we have the field objects still available, we are not sure if they are actually placed like this on those altars. So it's not a perfect solution. We still can have uncertainty into the colored parts because we only affect uncertainty. And the other thing is, we only can have two states. We can have either transparent or not transparent. Basically, we can have either the reality or not the reality, but we can't have those in-between states that often occur when those can inform each other. Because you might have scanned an altar from another place and used it as analogy, but this is basically, it's not possible with transparency. Therefore, we also look into color coding, which is also quite popular. And with color coding, we have two approaches. You can either color code your objects with a gradient. For instance, you can say everything in green is quite certain, and everything in red is uncertain, and then you draw a gradient between it, and depending on your certainty, you color the objects like dark green or some tone in between. But this has a disadvantage. You have to assign exact numerical values. You have to assign the exact value of uncertainty or certainty. And this is difficult because having your own value of certainty, it's different for every project, how they define their own certainty. And it's also nice I'm certain to 60% and it looks like this. Maybe one of you is only certain for 50% or 40% because you have a different knowledge base. And another variation of color coding is with using kind of categories. Basically, you assign different colors to categories, and it's a bit simpler because then you don't need exact numbers anymore. You can say everything in blue is based on literature sources, everything in green is based on archivals or on evidence on the object itself. But this also it's a bit better, but it also has a limitation. And then one of those limitations is you can only encode uncertainty. What are you doing if you want a rendering in which looks photorealistic, or what are you doing if you want to encode maybe the current status of the object, how when it is preserved, or if you want to encode any other kind of information. This is it's quite hard and difficult to do. But we thought in Florence for D what to do instead. We use vertex colors. Vertex colors is a system, or it's a concept in 3D modeling where you can assign to your vertices of the model values. And the thing with vertex, don't imagine it as color, it's more like a data container. And we can layer those. So we can create a layer for one kind of uncertainty. For instance, here we have created one layer, and it says, this layer says if the 3D LiDAR scan overlaps with the interpretation base. And then we can assign values, numerical values. In this case, only one yes and no. But there are, if you use RGB channels, you have almost 70 billion values you can assign and encode in this. And then you can use them for something called conditional rendering. And this is, you give your renderer the choice, or you give him a condition to render those objects depending on certain values. If you let them look at those values you have assigned to your 3D object, and it will then decide in which color it will render. And this way you can layer up different kinds, you can turn them on and off. And it works, for us it did work a little bit better than the pure color coding because we had a little bit more flexibility, but it still has its limitations and downsides. Because it's static. Once we have colored it and we have rendered it, we also can't change it anymore. And especially we wanted to change because maybe our art historian finds a new source and finds out something new, and they want to change it. And it also depends on the resolution of the 3D object, on the geometric resolution, and the data is quite basic. We don't necessarily want to assign just numbers to it. However, there have been some recent developments, at least in the software we use in Blender, that you can also attach string or text values to it. But this is basic. You can choose one point and attach an information or two information to it. We wanted to have a much better connection. And the next point with the documentation, we've been looking into the CIDOC CRM. And the CIDOC CRM is an ontology, and it's aimed for using cultural heritage to provide a way to formalize your data in a common language. This way we can make our data interoperable. When we encode our data in the CIDOC with the CIDOC CRM, and you do this with your project too, we can connect our two databases, or they can be connected with each other because they are based on a common understanding and a common logic. Yeah, when using the CIDOC CRM, you basically have classes that you map to your project entities, and then you can connect them with properties. Here's an example that my colleague Chiara Capelli from the Florence 4D project created, which describes the Lenzi altar. And then basically you take the Lenzi altar as a human-made thing. You go to the online manual or documentation of the CIDOC CRM, look up the class information, and then you can attach other properties and other attributes to it. While it's mainly based at cultural heritage, we also want to connect our digital data with it, like how does our 3D model look like, which parts are based on which data, and also where we store those models and which repository or how we can access them. And this is currently, it's a bit more difficult with the CIDOC CRM because it's based on cultural heritage. They have extensions like the CIDOC CRM, which is aimed towards the digital data, but it is still not fully there yet. Also with the complexity, like Florence 4D did with it, we had a team of different persons, of art historians or more digital-based persons who work together, and then we mainly, our results, we mainly move them into more accessible formats. Like you don't have to go into Blender or 3D programs or to the database backend to access it. You have apps, you have videos. So here, this is from our website. It's a 3D map, and it takes the CIDOC CRM data from our repository and plots it onto the map. And then you can also, instead of using the map itself, you can use the 3D models as access point to our data, which should show up in a moment. Basically, you can select one of those 3D models, and then you can explore them in the first-person perspective and go to the objects you're interested in and get the research data or access to the database behind it. Should also show, yeah, here, sure. And then this is basically, it's the same rendering from before, but instead of a static image, you can walk around, you can look at the different time periods. We've reconstructed 3 time periods and also have the nowadays, and then you can select those, get a short text, or directly go to the database where all those information are stored. However, this is also, there are also still some limitations with this solution. It's still quite static, and with all those programs, you have the problem if you want to update one 3D model, you have to update all of them. You have to update all your apps, you have to update all your web applications, you have to update the repositories, the research data. It's a lot to maintain and a lot of complexity to do. And with those, and now for my case studies, I'm using also the same approach in Florence 4D, but I'm aiming towards some of those limitations we just talked about, and I try to improve them. And especially also aim towards how to better connect 3D data and research data, so how to give it a direct connection, and which also stays active and up on the newest state at all times. Yeah, for my first case study, I'm working together with Anna McGee. She's also a PhD student at the University of Exeter in the National Gallery here in London. And her research focuses on the architecture, furnishing, and decoration of the 15th century Florentine Palazzo interiors. In particular, she's interested in the way of residents and guests navigate through these spaces, and focuses on transitional spaces such as thresholds, staircases, and passageways. By collaborating with Anna, she's able to reconstruct some of those domestic interiors in question, both testing out, illustrating her hypothesis regarding decoration and furnishing placement. She also hopes to adapt these digital outputs for public-facing applications. So it's not only about the 3D reconstruction itself, to have visualization, but it's also about the research question of Anna, the art historian, they try to solve with the help of those 3D objects. So the next 2 slides I've taken from her. And basically just to give you a short introduction on what the building is about. And here you can see it's Palazzo Medici in the center of Florence. And it's a huge palace built in the 1440s for the famous Medici family. On the map here, you can see its central location, and then you can see 2 pictures how it looks today and how it looked in the past. Well, from the outside, not much changed. The interior has changed quite a lot, and the buildings, the rooms have been remodeled. Many of its paintings, for example, here, those Frieze and Romano panels that you can see here, they are nowadays in museums. But they're not in museums in Florence anymore, they are all over the world. One is here the National Gallery, one in the Louvre, and one it's like in Florence, in a museum. However, there have been also many more paintings in this place, which have been destroyed or lost over the last 500 years. And the Camera Terrena, this is the room we want to reconstruct from this place. It had originally those 3 paintings and 3 more paintings, which have been lost. And it also had different functions over the same times. And Anna has chosen this room mainly because of the important paintings and also how it is developed. And also it has a really long research history. There have been reconstructions before made for this room, but it's good. We want to try it again and then also compare our approaches with the previous approaches and how this works. For the workflow, as it still exists today, we went to this place in 2020 with a small team of Florence 4D scholars, and we scanned large parts of the Palazzo Medici. Not all of them, but most of them. Here you can see a general point cloud from outside. When you zoom in, this is the Camera Terrena today. It's a nowadays ticket office for this place if you want to visit it. And here we also have, this is a point cloud. Here we have meshed the point cloud. You need to mesh them because it makes it much more easier to work with it in 3D software. You can already view point clouds in 3D software, but you miss a lot of tools to manipulate it, to manipulate the points or to do snapping or things like this. For instance, here you can already see a bit we have cut out the modern furniture, because modern furnishing wouldn't have been there 500 years ago. And down here, it's a cleaned up version, the so-called, we did some retopology, but I will talk about this in a moment a little bit more. Here, what we also did, most of you are probably familiar with photogrammetry, and we did it mainly for objects for which you wanted a better texture or sometimes better geometry, because the camera sensor of a DSLR is so much better than the cameras in our laser scanners that we use. And also good advantage is we can record objects selectively. By laser scanner, we put it in the middle of the room and it records everything. With photogrammetry, we can basically choose to only record like one of those corbels here. They were there to support on top of the walls to support the ceiling and the vaulting. And to do this photogrammetry, we just take several pictures from different perspectives and let the computer assemble them to a 3D model. But it works most of the time quite well. Here in this case, we had a challenge. Those corbels were really high in the room, so we're quite far away, and this means here you can see we have most of the undersurface, but we don't have the upper surfaces, so they are basically just holes. And we also have lower details because we have been quite far away from them. Another problem is the model furniture, which we saw earlier, they obstructed some of the curves. Some of them were behind cupboards or behind cables, so we just couldn't take pictures of them. However, photogrammetry and laser scanning produces huge amounts of data, and although we have quite powerful workstations in our project, we had to somehow optimize it and reduce it and make it more usable for our purpose and our things we wanted to do. And there are different ways to optimize your data. Usually you begin with it to just then generally automatically decimate the point clouds or the mesh to a size that you can use on your computer. You can see here on the left, you can see a 3D model or a reduced model which has 3 million vertices. And the file sizes, and to the right you can see the optimized version and the comparable values. And what we basically want to do with parts of them, we want to create an abstract imitation of the real 3D scan. And we want to force the general form into a more regular pattern. And this process will also create a base mesh without any of the model furniture. Like we have closed all the holes of the model furnishing, but you need to be aware, as soon as you start those things like closing the holes or closing the windows, it's adding a first layer of interpretation to your model. It's not based entirely anymore on measured data. So now we're already getting into the part where we mix reality-based and interpretation-based aspects with each other. And also, for instance, Anna found out that the windows in this room, they are still roughly the same positions, but they not exactly anymore. So we also close them to later refit them with the original windows. And this is possible in those high-resolution scans, but it's a lot of effort and it's not easy to do. It's much easier to do it in in a low resolution scan and in an optimized one. And you call this also, it's a retopology. And if you can do it automatically, but it doesn't give you the exact results you usually want. You have to do it manually. And you basically redraw this room in 3D. You draw surfaces over those walls in 3D and reduce them as much as you can, as much as possible. And it's really long and tedious process. So we also want to do this for selected parts, like the room itself. We didn't do this for the corbels. For the corbels, we just relied on the automatic reduction. But for the corbels, it's okay because we don't need to manipulate them any furthermore. The corbels stay the corbels. But here we might need to cut in new windows and new doors, and we have to close some of the holes. So we did this in this case. Yeah, although with the process of manual retopology, there's a lot of details, and it sounds maybe a little bit concerning. There's a lot of details, and that we do already first interpretations based on this model. But it's not too bad because all of those steps that will be documented later. And in our repository, we have the high resolution version as well as this other version. So you still have access to both kinds of data sets, and you can compare them. You can even calculate distance maps, which calculates the distance between those 3D models if you want to be really accurate. And also, yeah, with the corbels, like if you reduce them, what we do, there's also a process called baking, and baking allows you to transfer the details from high resolution measures to low resolution measures. And this we use mainly for the corbels, but I don't think we discuss this here anymore, those details. And also, what other advantage, we can work easier with it, but we can also use it now to create our apps for tablets or for the web or for the phone. If only possible with those large models, because no one wants to download apps with several gigabytes. If you have reduced them, they are much more user-friendly later and also run on low performance phones. However, we don't have access to all of the parts that still exist. Like the free paintings, they are still in existence, but we can't scan them because they are placed in different galleries. We don't have access to them. So the idea was, at least for now, we just take the images or the pictures of them from their websites and download them. But this also has some problems. We don't have any control over the quality it comes with, and it also gives us no information about color corrections they might have not made with them, or if they have been auto-rectified or anything else. And also, some of the websites they say the copyright, but not all of them have copyright information for us. So it's a bit difficult to know how to deal with them. However, for this case, or at least for the ongoing case study at the moment, we just use them from the website, those models, and then you can map them on 3D planes, which have the exact same size than the paintings, and basically place them in your room. It's a really simple and easy process, and probably in your workshop you have done probably something similar before. With paintings, it would be really suitable if you also could automate this process, because there are a lot of paintings out there, and if those websites, if they provide access via API or so, it would be possible to automate this process, but we are not that far yet. And here's also, this is one of those mixed cases where we have a lot of reality-based and interpretation-based reconstruction in one. This room has several doors, and Anna, who was doing a research in this, she found out that only one of those doors is in its original position and has the original size. So basically what we are doing now, we take this door in its original position, and we replicate, or we duplicate it over all the other positions where we assume there are doors. But this means we have maybe 3 or 4 doors which look exactly the same in this room, but only one door has a high certainty and the other one doesn't have it. And it's also why it's important to document it, because in the rendering you won't be able to see or know which one is the original door and why the other doors look exactly the same, so we have to do this. And then the other point is, when we were scanning this room, we were not aware of this. And so in our scan, the door looks like this. It has a big hole up there, and also the resolution is really low. But luckily we had one reference photograph where the door was a little bit on the side. And then together, when we combine them, we can create a more or less realistic model. But here again, while it looks quite similar to those and it's based on those measurements, this one is not a relative-based scan anymore, because there are a lot of assumptions in it. Because here we basically just mirror this part, because we're quite sure. Yeah, we knew how the door looked like, but we don't have in our primary data, and this somehow also needs to be documented. Yeah, and as we produce more and more digital data to feed in our model, we also need to find suitable data repositories and manage those files. For those repositories, we have two main requirements. Firstly, we want to use data repositories for the active development. This includes all the digital project files, 3D, non-3D, like also the photographs we took, or any scans. And this repository, more or less, it mimics our local file system, but we don't want it to be local. We want it to be remote and have version control and remote access or collaborative features, so that we can work together on those things, or can also work from other places. Or then when it's remotely, we can also easier establish a connection between the data. And currently we are exploring different kinds of repositories and see what works best. And secondly, we need a data repository that can hold and disseminate the finished data when we want our project, when it has reached a stage to be published. This was, it's about the point of persistence earlier, so that we can cite our model and that it certainly stays there for sure. There are also repositories like, maybe you know the CIDOC one from CERN. It is a quite generic repository and offers persistent identifiers and long-term storage. But they are not aimed towards some 3D models. It's certainly a good solution for now, but it's not yet the optimal solution we are looking for. And how the interpretation-based models are looking. This is also a slide to create ANA form. This is how I get the data from ANA to create those 3D reconstructions. Oh, this is one way she provides to me those. Usually she collects a lot of reference images and then makes her own sketches how they probably might have been placed in this room. And then my aim is to, based on this material, to recreate it. And I don't need to worry anymore about much of the documentation because she already has done it in the backend without me. And here it's about this barrier paneling. It's basically it has run along at the bottom around the room. Another aspect, what we want to try out with this is so-called parametric modeling. Parametric modeling allows us to create a 3D model, but then make it based on rules, because there are things, some of the dimensions are known for us, but some other dimensions can only be guessed. We don't know how high it is anymore. However, we know there are paintings above it, so it needs to be lower than the paintings. And with parametric modeling, we can expose certain parameters like the height, and we can create easy variations. We can easily create different heights, versions with different heights or with different modules and objects. Another way she provides the data, or how the researcher at the moment looks at the backend, is here with she has a Google spreadsheet, and there she writes down all the references and all the details for me. You see also some of the pictures where things are placed, and this gets according to the CIDOC CRM or to the templates we created Florence 4D, gets mapped to this CIDOC CRM. Here on the right side. And with the CIDOC CRM, it's a bit of a challenge because they're also quite difficult. Those ontologies, they take really long to make. And it's quite complicated to make them, and takes a long time. And also, like before, we don't have a proper connection to our 3D models yet. We have been trying a bit and working around, but it's we are not there yet where we have the proper connection. This is just, for now, it's just a placeholder. And the connection we want to establish between the physical object, this is basically the diagram we just saw here, only with all the properties around it. We have put away to have it a bit more, a bit better overview. We want to be able to access the creation, like all the steps, for instance, for photogrammetry, we want to have access to the photographs, then to the photogrammetry model itself, to the optimization, so for all the creation steps, but also for the final model. And then from the final model, we get out, those are the single renderings we later place in our presentations or in any of our applications. And how we want to create this connection, or how we want to make it more direct, is here. This is a preliminary result of the reconstruction. It has the door and some of the paintings and corbels in it. And basically, we want to have a way, and here we use OmikaS at the moment to store our research data. And we want basically a way to connect those two with each other, the 3D model with the OmikaS. Basically, we want to be able that you can select one of the paintings and then you get those data. But we also want to be able that Blender can use a conditional rendering based on this data, that you can take this data and let the software make any decisions about it, or the other way around. Or when I create a new object in the software, we want it to be reflected and directly input into the database without the need of going out of the 3D modeling software into our web interface and adding all of those things. Just for this, this is one of the early examples. It's basically the slide before, just an interactive versions where we have uploaded on the website and where you can explore those 3D models online. We can basically select one of those objects, and it will show you the database entry in Omeka. But this is already a first step. It's not optimal because we don't have no direct connection. We have two websites next to each other, but they can't influence it. They can't influence each other. We can't use the Omeka data to influence the 3D model. We can't use the 3D model to influence our art historical data in Omeka. And that's why I recently also started to work more with Python scripting in Blender. And Blender allows you with Python scripting to extend its functionality, to adjust it and allow it more functions. We want to extend the functionality between the 3D object and the art history database to expose values which we have entered in the database to the Blender internal systems for things like filtering objects or coloring objects or any form of geometrical or color manipulation or operation. We can also use this process to simplify it a little bit. Because the idea is to give the art historian more access to the 3D model itself, to let them experiment on their own where the paintings have been placed before. And we've seen those, I'm not sure which software you have used or learned those days, but they can be quite overwhelming at the first few days. And if you have never worked with them, it's not always easy, especially if you also want to attach the digital data or if you have to follow some guidelines. So with scripting, we want to simplify this process as much as possible, also that the art historians can try out a little bit on their own without the need of a 3D person to do everything they say. Yeah, and I'm currently working on this, but it's a big task because I'm not trained as a computer scientist. I was originally based in archaeology, now in art history. So it takes step for step, but so far what we can do, we can get any object in Blender or any 3D object, and we can assign it an object in our 3D database, and Blender recognizes this connection, and it can pull automatically the most recent data from the database into Blender itself, and attaches it to the 3D object. And then what we can do with this is just going back to the visual cues, because it's an easy example. If you have, for example, a certainty value in our database, Blender automatically recognizes it, and based on these certainty values, you can, based on this box here, it gives a green overlay. But you don't need to use a green overlay. You can also make it transparent, or you can make it disappear, show up, or don't show up, or show it with less or more details, or any possible operation what you can think of. And yeah, currently we are working on this, and we want to improve this a little bit more, that it's reaching a better status. With the second case study, I'm working together with Michaela Young from the University of Cambridge. And she's also a PhD student, and she's researching the presence of the Vallombrosan congregation in Florence during the 15th and 16th centuries. Her thesis explores the patronal and artistic relationships that characterize them and their impact upon the artistic and architectural fabric of churches like San Pancrazio and Santa Trinita. Together, we are reconstructing the chapels of the Brunke family of the Church of San Pancrazio, and Michaela wants to understand what architectural form these originally took. With the spatial insight, she can then better understand the relationships between the meaning and setting of artworks, as well as the liturgical and social use of these spaces within the church interior. And also it's here with those slides, I've taken them from Michaela's work. I won't tell you all of this, what I just told you before, because here in this case study, we are completely at the beginning at the moment. And also the methods will be relatively similar to what we have done before. But here you can see the chapel, and there's one of the artworks which is nowadays not there anymore, but it used to be there, and one of the tombs in it. What we use two case studies, because this allows us to use approaches with different kind of data. Because sometimes the problem is you prepare some kind of scripts or some kind of workflows, and they work perfectly with your case study, but as soon as you try to transfer to a different case study or try to use it again with something else, it somehow breaks, it doesn't work anymore. And this we want to conduct with a second case study with different data. But we also wanted to try out a few different things, like for example, with the project and data management, we're currently working on a new data management plan to improve our communication a bit and store everything, all the data more centrally than before. But we also want to try out different modeling software, 3D modeling software approaches. In the humanities, there's a discussion, a lot of people that use those free modeling softwares like Blender, Cinema 4D, or Maya. But there are also other people that use HBIM or BIM software like Reweaver or ArchiCAD. And while I use for Anna's research, mainly Blender, for Michaela's research, we want to use a BIM or HBIM software. And then to be able to compare the different approaches, and maybe they're probably both valid at some point. Maybe we can also get them close together. And we also want to look into different backends or where we store our data. For the first one, we use Omega S, but there are also many other kind of databases or content management systems that are able to store databases on the CIDOC CRM or on triplets itself. Yeah, for the conclusion now, to briefly summarize, I've given you now insight into my ongoing PhD work and the collaboration I do with Anna and Michaela on the research-based reconstructions. And as part for my digital documentation modeling, I'm following the approach of research-based reconstruction Florence 4D, but try to further investigate into its limitations and the direct linkage between the 3D data and the research-based art historical data. In addition, I want to make parts of this workflow better accessible that they are better easy for me, for the person using the 3D models to use, that they don't have to switch between all the softwares anymore, but also for other persons who don't use the software usually at all, so that they can also access it and work on their own without someone to tell anything anymore. Furthermore, this also enabled a lot of discussion between all three of us about the art historical research questions and their research topics. So it also includes a bit of, it helps out Anna and Michaela in their PhDs with research and their research questions, but their case studies also help me in return with having material for my case study and to test. And then finally, it's quite interesting if you have those connected 3D models, you can produce much more interesting outputs or results. Because imagine if you go to a museum, instead of showing a simple 2D rendering or 3D rendering of reconstruction, you can let the visitor explore this reconstruction and interrogate them or question them on your own. Yeah, I think this was it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Luca. That was brilliant, really, really interesting. It was really cool to see the whole pipeline from like collecting the data, creating the models, putting them online, sharing them on the website and Omega as well, and the repository, and then linking the data. It was brilliant. Do we have any questions from the room? Since we will have some time for the comments to load on YouTube, if we have any. Any questions from the people in the room? So far? Yeah.
Bear in mind that I'm a complete novice when it comes to 3D. I was just wondering, do you ever look at all at IIIF and their kinds of specifications? Because I think they have a community interest group that's trying to create some recommendations for 3D. Are they useful in this case? Can you find a way to improve?
We partly use them. We have on our Omega site, we have an IIIF server installed. And with this, we can, for example, with the 3D web map you saw earlier, we get all the data and the spatial points we get over the IIIF web server. And then, like I said, they're currently also working on a 3D implementation. And I think this would be perfect because then it doesn't matter anymore which repository we are using as long as it supports IIIF. So then we could use every project could use their own repository, it suits them best, and they just have to put on the IIIF interface or framework to make it all interoperable.
Any other questions? I found it super interesting to see the mapping that you were showing between the Excel spreadsheet and the CIDOC CRM.
Yes.
And you said that it was particularly complex because of how CIDOC CRM, how complex it is. So how was that experience and how far have you got with that? Were you involved in that as well in the model?
Yes. Some of us, we did a workshop in Delft for 1 week, just to learn the CIDOC CRM. And then a lot of those, with the artificial data is good because we can reuse many of the Florence 4D of the previous ontologies. A lot of them is reusable, but it still takes a lot of time because for every object you have to look through this documentation or manual and find the proper classes and the properties and how to connect each other with each of them.
And it's really cool to see how you were like first kind of figuring out the mapping on the spreadsheet and then moving it to the diagrams. And so on the spreadsheet, what were you using as the column headers? Was that the properties and the...
This was quite unstructured. We just gave Anna complete freedom to choose it. Probably, I think one was dimensions, one was notes and remarks. So we kept so that the beginning is really simple and really low. So you can just start with your data and then later we thought about it how to structure it a bit better. Because we also the thing is we have 3 PhD students, but we are at different stages. Like Anna's 1 year ahead of me, and they're not only doing this. It's only a small part of the PhD, and it's difficult to get it all more or less synchronized, so that it happens at the same time for us.
Wow.
Thank you. I have a question that I was wondering whether you think that at the moment it seemed like you said there's so many different possibilities for representing uncertainty, and it seems like it's a lot maybe up to what you're able to do and also what you want to do and what kind of purpose you have. But I was wondering, do you think maybe in a couple of years there will be guidelines or like common ways in which people will always recognize like this is always how it's done? Like I'm thinking now when you look at plans, like quite often we're used to seeing maybe dotted lines, and then we know like, okay, that's clearly reconstructed or that isn't there anymore. Like, do you think we're sort of, that is a trajectory, or are there just so many options?
I think it's difficult because the projects and the data, they're always so unique. Like with the categories, many projects have different kind of sources and evidence. So to fit them into categories, it's really difficult. But then also how do I apply a numerical scale from 0 to 100%? You also need to translate it somehow into words or into some relative scale. And I'm not sure how this is best possible. That's why we follow the approach that we put all the data in our database, and then later let basically our conditional rendering that to a later time we can decide it how we want to do it, and then we can also decide differently in a couple of years later because it's all still there. And with the transparency, like what we did at the beginning, I think in archaeology it's quite popular. When you only have foundations left over, then it works really easily. You have the foundations in the floor, you scan to the 3D scan and put interpretations on top of each other, because the foundations that they're static, that they don't move anymore. But like if the artworks, they're still moving today and they've moved in the past. And then it showed for us that it's not working, it's not optimal. It's a nice way to show, but it's not the optimal solution for the end here.
It's a very good question. I wonder whether maybe a standard will kind of like impose over the others because it's easy to use, and then suddenly people begin, even if there is no guideline, but like everybody starts to use the same thing because they understand really what it means. Any questions?
I'm wondering, I mean, similar question based on the distinction between all the conflict or tension between making a model that that looks nice, that you understand what's going on, that you can navigate around, that communicates something to both an academic and potentially other kinds of audiences, and a model that makes clear and unambiguous all of this very complex metadata, including certainty, but so many other things as well, that how do you feel about that tension? Is it something that you would allow the user to say, move on a sliding scale, just show me the nice image, now show me all the weird metadata, now show me all the transparency and 7 million or whatever it was, different colors that you can do? Or how do you feel about that sort of tension?
I think we definitely need to keep some kind of interactivity, that you can choose what you want to see, because like you said, there are so many different things behind this, and not everyone wants to see the same thing. We often have the discussions when we color-code uncertainty, not everyone wants to see the color-coded uncertainty on their first side. It's something really important, and it's really necessary for those models to be documented. But when you see the reconstructions, you don't want to see those colorful reconstructions that have many different colors, like many different gradients. You might want to see how it actually looked like, or which materials they most likely have been used. And then if you're interested in how this has been done, then you want to have the particular or the specific access to those informations. And it's also like probably also for the public, it's much more appealing to have those more realistic versions, and then later on to give them access for the interested persons. You just need to find a way to make it clear at the beginning that it's only a hypothetical reconstruction and it's not how it used to be. Yeah.
Okay, no more questions?
I mean, sorry, just following up the same question. I'm thinking, I mean, I have a lot of sympathy with your, as I understood it, slight discomfort with assigning numbers to certainty. Yes. Because what does it mean to be 60% certain of something? Yes. You know, I mean, it really doesn't. And I mean, coming from a very different field of text encoding, I similarly, I don't ever want to say, I think this word could be either this or this. Yeah. And you know what percentage of certainty I have. That would be meaningless. What I want to be able to do is to communicate something about these different choices. What's the impact of these choices? You know, if the window was here, then the door can't have been there. Or if I'm going back to models now. Yeah. But, you know, if the evidence supporting this interpretation is this sort of evidence, the evidence supporting that interpretation is that sort of evidence. It's primary evidence. We've got an ancient text, we've got a modern text. This interpretation I don't really believe, but scholar X published on it, and so I'm representing it as well, as, you know, for completeness. That sort of it's much more. I'm much more interested in qualitative comments on the data than anything you can attach numbers to.
That's weird. But it also, since this guy who uses CIDOC CRM to make it interoperable, they have the argumentation, they have also an argumentation extension, and it makes it really complicated, really complex we looked into the argumentation model, and then you have those trees for only one argument looks suddenly like this tree, and like you said, there are so many. If you do a reconstruction, if you do something there's not one argument. There's for the Florence 4D, for the Innocenti, it took us 2 years of discussions and argumentations, and then you also need to find a balance for what is feasible, what you can actually do with your resources, and what is maybe not possible at the moment, or where there's no optimal solution. Yeah.
I just have one more question about Omeka, because I had heard it as a kind of content management system that needs to be connected to a repository or a database. So what repository were you using to host the data? Do you know, or how is it? Yeah.
For Omeka, we just have a web server, and then we have inside Omeka, and I think it's with a normal database behind it. And then we don't use Omeka as how it's supposed to be used as content management system. We only use it as backend to store the data. Okay. And we don't use any of the front end features or the graphical features. We just like with Blender, we just send a request and ask it to return us information about this object.
And you use a free version of Omeka, or?
Yeah, Omeka it's called. Yes.
Is it? Okay.
But when we go to, there are also different repositories like the Whiskey or Drupal, or Whiskey and Drupal, they're similar to each other, but they are often used, and yeah.
That's really cool. Definitely going to have a look at the Florence 4D website and play with it. Yeah, that's really cool. Any more questions from the room or people online? Seems not so far. Okay. Okay, well, so if there are no more questions, we will be finishing now, closing it here. Thank you so much, Luca. It was amazing, brilliant, and really, really interesting. Thank you, everyone, for coming today, and for the people watching online or who are watching later. And yeah, hopefully we'll see you next summer for the digital cases again. And yeah, thank you so much.